For 25 years, Father Miguel was the silent witness of promises made before the altar, some born of the purest love, others of the crudest convenience. The church of Santa Catalina, with his ceiling vaulted and stained glass worn by the time, had harbored tears, laughter, and silences that spoke more than the words. Father Miguel knew the trembling glances of those who married out of habit, and also his serene brightness of those who, when they realized the yes, sealed something. Authentic. That is why, when Roberto Miller and Ana first crossed the threshold of that church, he had felt it wasn't a certainty but a hunch deep, almost uncomfortable. There was in that couple a connection palpable, a synchronicity that could not be rehearsed. Roberto, with his firm hands and his calm voice, radiated respect and responsibility. Ana, on the other hand, seemed like a soft melody. Her gestures were precise, her shy laugh, and her deeply attentive gaze. He was a man, acquaintance in his village, owner of 3 hardware stores, devoted, supportive, always located in the 3rd row of the temple during the Masses Sundays. She, a newly upon arrival in the village, she worked as a nurse in Memorial Hospital. And, although I didn't have it yet roots, he moved as if he were trying to put them down with urgency. Mrs. Peterson, the secretary of the church, looked with tenderness every time they attended the meetings, premarital. They make a couple so pretty, he used to say. Ana had started the catechumenate a few months ago, driven not by pressure, but by a desire genuine to understand the Roberto's faith. In his conversations with Father Miguel, showed a mixture of curiosity and humility that it was moving. I had never seen someone so dedicated to that spiritual path. Everything seemed fit with a harmony almost heavenly, until the darkness called the door, disguised as a warning. The first crack in that perfection arrive in the form of enigmatic words. A woman with a sharp face and cloudy gaze approached Father Miguel one afternoon when I was leaving the sacristy. It had a grey coat and a scarf that covered half face, but his voice was firm, almost hurtful. "Mellerich's wedding will be memorable," he said, without further ado, leaving in the air a scent confused with threat and prophecy. The priest frowned. He frowned. Nobody used that name, Mellerich, for decades. He was an old term that mixed melody and richness, a word that he alone had heard in ancient texts on symbolic marriages. He tried to follow her, but the women disappeared after the pillars of the atrium as if fading away in he time. That night, while reviewed the records in his office, the phone rang, an anonymous call, a female voice. But this time it wasn't ambiguous. It was a desperate plea. "Father, please listen to me. Ana is dead." Miguel's heart stopped a moment. The voice continued, broken, full of anguish, and as if each word cost air. "The woman who is going to get married with Roberto, it's not Ana. Her name is Lin Nguyen. It was his roommate in the university. Ana died in an accident in Vancouver. She took your place." The father felt a cold walk through the back. The woman offered disturbing details. The real Ana had a deep scar on the back, the result of scoliosis surgery in the adolescence. The impostor does not had, and in his place he wore a tiny tattoo behind the ear, left, symbol of an ancient sisterhood student. There was no physical evidence, just those clues, but something in the way the voice trembled did, impossible, ignore her. Father Miguel did not sleep that night. He paced back and forth in his small room parish, murmuring prayers that brought no peace. He checked the documents of the catechumenate. He observed again the photos taken during the meeting's premarital, and even stopped to stare a short video where Ana, or Lin, talked about her spiritual conversion. Nothing seemed out of place, and yet that voice, that call, it had penetrated in a way that no one sermon or confession there was done before. To the tomorrow next, during the Mass, he couldn't help but watch her with others' eyes. Ana waved with sweetness to the parishioners, helped an old woman to sit down. His gestures were spotless, but when he bent down to pick up a fallen Bible, his neck was partially exposed. There, just behind the ear, Miguel thought he saw a streak dark, small, curved, almost imperceptible. A mole, a tattoo. I couldn't know it for sure, but his faith staggered for the first time. Have you ever doubted what it seemed correct? If this part touched you, continue the page for more stories like this. He decided he couldn't act without further ado. It would be unfair, even dangerous, to raise an accusation without tests, but neither could remain silent. So he wrote a letter, by hand in shaky handwriting, addressed to the alleged whistleblower. She used the number that appeared in the call log and left the envelope in the gate of the confessional, trusting that she would return. For days, nothing happened. The father remained steadfast in his duties, but every good Anna's days crossed like a doubt stabbing. What if it was being unfair? What if it was all a misunderstanding? What if the faith had to be stronger than the suspicion? However, fate would not be long in coming in, take it out of your paralysis. Because exactly 7 wedding days, someone I would cross the river again door of the church, and this time with evidence in the hand. Was a Wednesday at dusk when Grace Chan appeared in the church. She introduced herself as Ana Chen's maternal aunt and showed Father Miguel a folder of documents, letters and photographs that would change the course of everything. In the images, Ana posed with her family at different stages of life. Birthdays, school trips, festivities in Beijing. The last photo was recent, taken in Vancouver, with the date and location printed in the back. It was he day before the accident, Grace said with her voice cracked. That car overturned in the route back to campus. Ana died, but her companion, Lin Nguyen, survived. Father Miguel felt the world crumble beneath his feet. Grace, with trembling hands, pulled out also a light blue covered diary. It was the Ana's personal notebook, rescued of the bedroom that he shared with Lin. The pages were filled with intimate thoughts, notes about his faith, her doubts, and about Roberto, whom she was just getting to know through messages online before your trip. It more disturbing, however, was the last handwritten fragment. Lin told me it would be, "It's better not to return to the village. I'm not enough for him." Yeah, I would know as make him happy. He gave me fear. Sometimes I feel like he's watching me as if could delete me. Miguel closed her diary with a chill. Grace had no doubts. Who was doing it calling Ana was an imposter, and the most disturbing thing was what perfect of the disguise. He had adopted her tone of voice, her gestures, even the passages of the diary, as if they were own. With the days, Lin had been erasing the traces of the real Ana, and nobody in the people, and without knowing her before, could tell the difference. Miguel knew he couldn't confront her without evidence officers, but could no longer be silent. The moral dilemma tore. Apart, faith or justice, truth or prudence. Have you something like this happened, where the heart and the awareness, did they fight? Tell me about it, in the comments. The days following were a parade of crossed glances, awkward silences, and a restlessness that settled like damp between the walls of Santa Catalina. Father Miguel officiated the masses with his divided heart. Every time Ana or Lin approached the altar to receive the blessing, I had to contain, he trembling of her hands. I no longer saw a devoted girlfriend, but a living question mark. I had discreetly sent a request for verification to the Canadian consulate, but the answer would not arrive before the wedding date. Meanwhile, Roberto continued oblivious to the abyss that yawned beneath his feet. He spoke with enthusiasm for the arrangements, for the reception, of the menu with dishes from both cultures. He even asked permission to say a prayer in Mandarin during the ceremony, a gesture that moved Miguel, and at the same time, filled with a pain unbearable. One afternoon, Ana asked, "Confess." He knelt down in a confessional, and although the rack prevented us from seeing his face completely, the father felt a shudder. She spoke of guilt. She said she had done things I couldn't undo, that love her there was pushed to paths that never would have considered, that sometimes, to survive, one had to choose between truth and the dream of a new life. Miguel doesn't interrupted. He didn't ask details. He just listened, with her soul in suspense. In the end, she whispered, "You believes that God can forgive someone who has lied, even if it is, did you do it for love?" The silence was absolute. The father felt that a part of him I wanted to scream, but another it urged the compassion. He replied with a single sentence, "Forgiveness. It is always possible, daughter, but the true also it is." She said no more. She left walking slowly, like someone who knows the world is about to collapse. As he approached on Saturday, the day chosen for the wedding, the atmosphere in the people became almost unreal. The parishioners, they spoke with enthusiasm of the union between Roberto and Ana, and some even commented that it would be the most beautiful ceremony in years. Nobody imagined what was about to happen. Father Miguel, for his part, lived among the vigil and the prayer. He consulted with the old confessor of his seminar, asking orientation without revealing names. The answer was clear and sharp. If your heart burns in doubt, you can't bless that union with peace. It was the confirmation of what already I knew. And yet something in his insides were tight. What if the anonymous voice was lying? What if Grace was wrong? What if Anna wasn't Lynn, but just another victim of a cruel coincidence? The idea of ruining someone's innocent life was overwhelming, tormented, but the silence also it converted in accomplice. Miguel decided then that he would not interrupt the ceremony, unless something, a clear sign, evidence undeniable, it happened before their own eyes. And it happened. On the wedding day, the church was packed early. Ramos blancos hanging from the benches. String music floated in the air, and the sun passed through the stained glass windows with a golden light that bathed the altar. Roberto, wearing a dark suit and with a serene face, waited next to Father Miguel. Far away, it was heard the wedding. Melody, Ana, or Lynn, appeared of the arm of a man major, with a lace dress and a long veil that barely allowed her features to be seen. She walked with elegance, without hesitation. But just when the priest took the word and began to pronounce the words, initials of the rite, a voice rose from the benches. "I object." A murmur toured the temple as a lightning. A woman stood up of the background. It was Grace. She was holding a folder up like a torch. The chaos was immediately. The musicians stopped playing, some guests stood up, and Roberto turned slowly, confused. The bride remained paralyzed, still halfway there toward the altar. Grace, with the breathing heavily, she walked determinedly along the central aisle, while he shouted, "That's not Ana Chen, that's Lin Nguyen, an impostor who took your place after his death, the voice of the women." It boomed like a thunder inside the temple. Father Miguel tried to intervene, but it was too late. Several attendees they started, recording with their phones, and the murmurs grew like a wave unstoppable. Lin, because already nobody the Ana called, he said the bouquet, which fell to the ground like a silent declaration. Her face, previously imperturbable, turned white as the stone. He turned and ran toward the exit, leaving behind him a veil floating like the last vestige of his lie. But it didn't arrive away. Two guests, alerted by the tension, they moved forward to stop it in the entrance of the church. Not with violence, but with disbelief. Lynn stood still, panting, as if she knew this was the end of her charade. Grace handed over the documents to Father Miguel, who they held with trembling hands. In there was everything: Ana Chen's death certificate, Lin Nguyen's university record, and a handwritten letter that the latter had forgotten to destroy. A note addressed to a friend confessing his plan. Roberto, in shock, did not pronounce word. His eyes, overflowing, looked at no one, only at the ground, as if searching in the temple tiles an explanation that allowed to continue breathing. Lin, for his part, did not deny anything. He stayed there, standing, with the shoulders slumped and silence as the only defense. He didn't ask, "Sorry. I didn't try run away." He just muttered, "I loved." There was no need for the police intervene immediately. It was Roberto who, in a barely audible voice, asked not to hurt. "I want to understand," he said, "but I did in." That moment, he left the church without looking back, leaving everyone silent, as if with his departure would have been taken also the air. Father Miguel suspended the ceremony between sighs and prayers whispered. Some guests left indignantly, others remained in their banks, as if they expected that was part of a misinterpreted script. Grace, for her part, sat in the front row, exhausted, with hands on the lap, as Lynn was escorted by 2 parishioners to the parish office. There, in front of her, the weathered wooden crucifix crumbled, and for the first time since it all began, she wept, not as an exposed impostor, but as a woman defeated by her own decisions. In the days following, the news spread like wildfire throughout the town and beyond. Headlines spoke of the ghost bride, the imposter nurse, the wedding that ended in scandal. Lynn was arrested for identity theft and fraud, but did not file resistance. During the trial, confessed every detail. How had found the Anne's diary, how memorized his words, how studied his gestures, how it was done go through it to earn he Roberto's heart and ensure a life away of the abandonment she had known since she was a child. The most surprising thing was when he said, through tears, that at first everything had been a plan, but with time had truly fallen in love. His words, they divided the community. Some they asked justice exemplary, others perhaps moved by the fragility of his story. They felt compassion, and among all, Father Miguel became in he depository of a question without answer. Can love born from a lie redeemed by the truth of a feeling? Father Miguel, for his part, found no rest. The church, once a place of refuge and certainty, became for him in a space for suspended questions. In his prayer daily, the Ana's face, the true, appeared mixed with Lynn's, and although their names they could no longer occupy the same space, its stories they seemed intertwined by an invisible thread of pain. One night, unable to sleep, Miguel sat in the side chapel and lit a candle for each of them. One for Ana, whose life was cut short without warning, another for Roberto, who had been betrayed but also loved, and a third for Lynn, whose lie had been his only way of getting closer to a life he felt unattainable. In the loneliness of the empty ship, the priest whispered, "Lord, help me understand what the judgment cannot explain." The Ana's words, captured in that letter never sent, they perforated her Roberto's heart with a mixture of tenderness and guilt. He discovered a woman who was torn between desire to be enough and the fear of not fitting in a world that is not understood completely. Ana spoke of her doubts about marriage, not because of a lack of love, but because of the uncertainty of carrying a story with you so complex. "I don't want you to fall in love with an ideal version of me," he had written, "but with what I am, with my silences, my scars, my roots." Roberto read and reread those lines as if they were an intimate sacrament, a confession between the folds of the time. It was so when he understood that he couldn't let your story will end in scandal. He decided to honor Ana's memory in a way that would transcend the tragedy. Founded in his name, a scholarship for young people nurses in the hospital where she had dreamed to work. He called the initiative Ana's Light, and there was no opening ceremony. Bombastic just a letter hanging on the wall, written by him same, because a short life is not a life without impact. Because even if the I knew only in his words, those words changed me forever. Father Miguel attended in silence the day in which it was granted the first scholarship. He had in the hand a small wooden cross, the same as Ana had held during his catechumenate classes. He placed it on a hospital shelf next to a lit candle, and for the first time since the failed wedding, he felt something sacred was happening. Not a miracle of those who defy the laws of the world, but a deeper, more human one, that of transforming the pain in legacy. They passed the months, and with they arrived the silence. A silence different from that of the days after the scandal, less dense, less judgmental. It was the kind of silence that settles when people have said all I could say, and now all that's left is to observe. Roberto began to leave again, not with frequency, but enough so that the neighbors they saw walk along the square, have coffee in the corner, or simply feel in the park bench where I used to talk with Ana, or at least with who I thought it was her. She never spoke publicly of the judgment nor of his pain, but their actions spoke for him. He was kind, serene, a little more reserved than before. However, he had recovered the custom of greeting with a slight nod of the head, that gesture he used to recognize without words to whom it accompanied in their grief. And it was in one of those cloudy days when he whined began to announce the change of season, which saw she was sitting in front of the source, with her shorter hair and a grey wool scarf that covered part of the face. Lynn, or as it was done now call, Clara. There was no startled nor escape, just the exchange of glances that lasted more than a blinking, but less than a conversation. Roberto approached slowly. He sat down next to her without say, "Nothing." She was the first in talk. "I didn't expect to see you." "Nor I to you," he replied. He was a long silence, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was as if they both knew that this moment, sooner or later, had to happen. Not to return to the past, but to, in some way, close it with dignity. "Is it your real name?" Roberto asked, without looking directly. Lynn nodded, although his voice was barely a whisper. "Clara is my grandmother." His name. She was the only person who believed in me. Before all this, did you love her? She didn't respond immediately. She looked at her hands, rubbed them fingers with nervousness, and then raised the view. "I think so, but I'll never know if I loved her or him." Idea of what she could give me. I was invisible, Roberto, in everywhere, and with your gaze. For the first time, I felt I existed. The words did not ask sorry. Neither they sought to justify it unjustifiable. They were just the naked truth, a confession. I was not looking for absolution, but understanding. Roberto nodded slowly, as if find a piece he lets go that he's not trying to force it anymore. He didn't say, "I forgive you," but he didn't leave either. They stayed there, sitting in front of the source, while the leaves were beginning to fall around like silent witnesses of a closure that I didn't need ceremony. Clara took a picture out of her bag, small white envelope, without name, without address. "It is offered, Roberto, without look at it. If this moment touched you, share this story. With who needs believe in new beginnings. It I wrote, does time. I didn't know if you I would give, but I think it's fair." He it took with softness, without open it immediately. He held it between his fingers as if it were fragile, as if carrying it already implied a responsibility. Clara stood up. Her shadow lengthened over the cobblestones from the park. "I won't be back. This was my last stop here, but I needed look at you eyes. Not like Ana, not like Lynn, like me. To thank you, even if you don't, you understand now." Returning home, he sat down in the table where I used to plan her wedding. The envelope was still sealed, opened carefully and found inside a single sheet of paper, written in blue ink. It was a short letter. "Clara didn't ask for sorry. I was talking of love as an act of survival, of the mistakes one makes when one is alone, and how sometimes lies are born from a desperate desire to be loved. I don't expect redemption," he concluded the letter, "only that someday you can remember my name without pain. Just that." Roberto laughed, folded in silence, and the saved in Ana's diary, right between the pages where I was talking about the compassion. The days following, they were quiet, almost too much, as if the world had decided to grant Roberto a truce, a space to breathe. Without the constant weight of the memories, he resumed his routine slowly. He attended the hardware store that was left with dedication, but no longer with the same impulse as before. His gestures were slower, their words more thoughtful. Some clients, they asked, with I dissemble, if I was good. He responded with a slight smile, one that promises nothing but also nothing rejects consolation. In the nights, I used to walk to the church, not to attend Mass, but to sit in the last bank, where no one I saw, where silence had formed and the echo of the prayers ancient still floated in the air. I wasn't looking for it their answers, just presence. Yours, Anna's, Clara's, God's perhaps. Father Miguel noticed his presence but never approached. He had learned that the pain has his own rhythm, your own language, and that sometimes the elderly an act of compassion is to say nothing. In one of those nights, Roberto stopped to look at a lit candle next to the figure of the Virgin. He didn't know why, but his eyes filled with tears. Not for Anna, not for Clara, for him, man who had been, for whom he had lost, for whom he now was trying to be. He understood that the forgiveness not always arrives as a divine ray, but rather like a slow breeze that wears away the resentment until it turns to dust. And in that dust are born seeds new, of faith, of reconstruction, of humanity. That one night, when leaving the church, looked at the sky for the first time in a lot time and murmured, "Thank you for not leaving me alone." They passed the seasons. The Luz de Ana scholarship began to have a real impact on the community. Young people, nurses, many of them from poor families, were able to begin their studies thanks to that background. Each of them I received, at the time of being accepted, a letter written by Roberto. It was not a heroic speech, but an intimate reflection on the value of vocation, the fragility of life and the power of acts invisible. Some they responded with gratitude, others simply kept the letter as a talisman. What no one I knew that for Roberto, each letter was a way to continue talking with Ana. His desk kept his diary as an emotional compass, and returned to it in the grey days when he passed, threatened with become present. Was in one of those days that a young woman approached the hardware store. Her name was Elena Suarez, a recent graduate in nursing and one of the first beneficiaries of the scholarship. She had a notebook in the hand and a shy smile on her face. "I just wanted thank you in person," he said, while extended the hand. Roberto, surprised, invited her in. They talked for a long time. She spoke with passion of his job in the pediatric unit, of the children that he cared for, of the small miracles diaries. His voice was luminous, and his enthusiasm had that vibration that he once had seen in Ana. It was not a replacement. It wasn't a comparison. It was just life, something new, clean, honest. When she left, Roberto stayed silent for a few minutes, watching the chair empty. Then, without knowing why, he was surprised, smiling. It wasn't happiness still, but he is. It seemed a lot. The meetings with Elena, they became sporadic, but significant. Sometimes was passing by hardware store just to say hello, others to tell something short story about your turn at the hospital. Roberto, the I, listened with attention. Genuine, and although they spoke little about their personal lives, among them was formed a discreet bond, made of respect and shared silences. One afternoon, while she leafing through a toolbox, ancient, said something that left motionless. "Sometimes I think the bravest thing we can do is stay alive when everything inside us wants give up." "Don't do it," said as consolation, nor as confession, said as if understands from within, like someone who has felt the same darkness. Roberto did. Not respond, but his eyes, moist, met with hers. And in that crossing there was a silent recognition. Two souls who were not looking for each other, but who knew read he pain of the other. Nothing else happened that afternoon. Not a touch of hands, not a promise. Just a real connection, without artifices. Roberto closed the hardware store earlier and walked to the church. He found Father Miguel watering the plants in the side garden. They greeted each other with a nod and walked together without talking for several minutes. Finally, Roberto stopped and said, Do you think it is possible to trust again?" Miguel stayed in silence. Then he smiled with tenderness. I don't know if it's about going back, son. I think it's about learning to trust differently. Elena didn't ask too many questions. She never. He asked Roberto to tell what he had experienced, but he didn't do it either. Pretended not to, I knew. There was read about its scandal, heard rumors, had even seen the Clara's face in the news. But he chose silence as a gesture of respect. Instead of prying in, he passed. Him spoke of the present, of the children who drew hearts in his cures, of an old woman who gave away cookies homemade, of the double shifts that exhausted but filled the soul. Every word his was a small window, open to a different world, one where love didn't hurt to remember. And Roberto, however, give account. He began to wait for those visits, like someone who waits for the sun after many winters. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was hope. And that, for him, was already a form of miracle. One day, Elena appeared with a box between the arms. Inside, there were a scrapbook with photos of the first Roberto and Ana fellows. Thank you letters, handwritten notes. There was created she on her own initiative. I think you deserve to see what you planted, she said, with a warm smile. Roberto leafed through the pages in silence. Each face, each story, was a lit spark where once there had been a shadow. When he reached the last page and found a photograph of a lit candle in front of a wooden cross. The same cross he there was left in the hospital, next to Anna's name. Below, a text written in gold ink, where there was true, there will be light. He felt a knot in the throat, not out of nostalgia, but out of gratitude. For the first time in a lot time, felt that love was not only memory, but also possibility. That honoring the past was not living in he, it was learning to follow. If you think that the true can bloom even from the pain, support us with a like or a comment. That night, Roberto lit a candle in his living room. Not out of religious custom, but out of an intimate, almost instinctive impulse. He sat down in front of the call and placed the next to him Anne's diary and Clara's letter. Both documents, so different in his origin, they shared something in common, the need to be seen, understood, recognized without judgment. He observed the two roles as who observed the fragments of a life that no longer belongs to him, belongs completely, but still inhabits it. I didn't know if there was forgiven Clara. Maybe yes, maybe not. But he had understood something deeper. The forgiveness not always requires no prior justice, no subsequent forgetting. Sometimes it's enough stop loading. And that night, when closing both writings, he knew he didn't need any more answers, just presence, just peace. Up to date next, he went to the hospital with a little girl box wrapped in craft paper. He looked for Elena in the break room, and it handed over without too many words. "It's something I want you to have," she said. She opened the package gently and found inside a wooden cross identical to the from the hospital. It was the second one that Roberto had carving with his own hands. In the base, an inscription, "For all that is cared for without being seen." Elena said nothing. She just hugged, not like who consoles, but as someone who celebrates a bridge. It was a brief, contained gesture, but in that contact made Roberto feel a certainty. Love is not always needs names, nor promises. Sometimes it's enough to be, with stay, not run away. That day, for the first time, he did not return walking home. He walked around the park, sat down by the source, and observed his own reflection without fear, because it was no longer the same. Sitting next to the source, Roberto noticed something that he had previously there was past unnoticed. The water reflected he darling with a clarity that didn't seem real. He remembered how many times had avoided that place after his scandal, as if he feared that his image revealed something to him that he didn't want to face. But now, looking at his reflection, saw no guilt or confusion. He saw a man who had crossed the storm, and still he was breathing, not intact, not unharmed, but standing. That night, when he returned home, he dusted off a box he had been carrying, closed for years. Inside, they were your photos, childhood, the drawings that I made with his mother, some old letters, and an envelope he had never had open, a letter from his father written before he died. He had kept it without value, resentful of old ones' wounds. Now, with firm hands, he broke his seal. The letter contained no great revelations, just memories, simple advice. One sentence stood out, in half from the text, underlined with firm stroke. Do not build your life with bricks of the past, son, but don't forget where you come from. You took them. Roberto read and reread those words, feeling that finally his family history, the one he never wanted to face, also deserved a place in his redemption. It was not enough with forgive Clara or honor Anna. He had to reconcile with their own roots, with the silences of his childhood, with the way in which abandonment had molded his idea of love. Up to date next, visited his parents' grave. He didn't carry flowers, he carried questions, and he sat in front of the tombstones with the same attitude with the one who had learned to look at her present, not looking for definitive answers, but letting space for the listen, for the stillness. For him, closing necessary. Sundays began to have meaning again, not because of the liturgy, but because of the intimate ritual that Roberto was creating, little by little. I woke up early in the morning. I calmly prepared coffee and went out for a walk, without a fixed destination. Sometimes ended in the church, others in the hospital, others simply under a tree, watching the children play. I no longer needed to avoid the memories. I had learned to live together with they, without it devoured. Each place had a trace. The bank where he thought proposed to Anna, the store where you bought it the veil that was never used, the path where you once thought you could not follow. But now, each of those spaces had also another layer, a smile from Elena, a word from Father Miguel, a new look at oneself same. And so, the city that was once a map of the pain became in healing territory. One day, while organized a donation box in the hardware store, found by chance a forgotten notebook. It was one of his old ones, youthful sketches, full of impossible plans, inventions he never built, leafed through with tenderness. In the last page, there was a drawing simple, a small house with a garden, and below, written in black ink, a phrase, someday here. He closed a notebook, and for the first time thought that maybe that someday didn't have to be so away. That same week, he visited a piece of land at outskirts of the people who always you had seemed too big for him alone. Now it is not, it seemed so much. Not because I'd like fill it right away, but because he simply felt ready to plant something new. He didn't know if it would be a home, a garden, a shelter, but it would be his, and it would grow from the true, not from the costume. Elena was the first person to whom you speak of the land. The he mentioned casually while they took a coffee on one of those afternoons that had already been turned custom. She did it, I'm listening with attention, without interrupt. And when he finished describing the trees that bordered the place and the light that fell, in the afternoon, he said simply, I would like see it. There was no forced enthusiasm, neither implicit promises, only a sincere willingness to accompany. They visited the land together on a Saturday in the morning. The grass grew tall, and the air had that clean scent of places that have not yet been touched by cement. Elena walked silently. He bent down to stroke the land, and then, with a gentle smile, said, here could have something good happen. Roberto did not respond, but his chest loosened somewhat, as if that phrase had given permission to dream. Since then, they began to meet over there more often. Sometimes they were wearing sandwiches, others just a blanket to sit under old eucalyptus tree background. They spoke little about the future, but a lot of the present, of the books they read, of the recipes that failed, of the days that weighed and those that didn't. It was an intimacy without urgency. Roberto learned to laugh again, not as someone trying to forget, but as someone who allows himself to live with what he remembers. One afternoon, While the sun was setting behind the hills and casting long shadows between the trees, Elena took the hand. There was no shock, there was no vertigo, only warmth. Roberto didn't think in Ana nor in Clara, he thought in that moment. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was betraying anyone. He understood that love is not replacement, but continuity, and that sometimes, after of the fire, life flourishes in the cracks. Father Miguel watched everything from the distance, with the discretion of whom has learned that the miracles not always they come with fanfare. Sometimes are small, almost imperceptible, like a less tense look, a smile more honest, an outstretched hand without fear. In one of his conversations with Roberto, meanwhile they shared a lemonade in the sacristy, the priest commented with serenity, "It is not common to see someone to rebuild from so deep, without become stone in his process." Roberto smiled with humility. It was not considered an example of nothing, but he knew that something inside him had changed irreversibly. He no longer walked charging the weight of the past as a cross, but as a memory tattooed on the skin, visible, yes, but not painful. Miguel handed over a small wrapped object in velvet. It was the ring that Roberto had ordered made for Ana, never worn. "Maybe you can give it another destination," he said the father. Roberto saved without words. "Days after church, while I was walking with Eleanor on the ground, speak of the ring, not as a proposal, not as a symbol, as a story." He told her everything from the beginning, the letter, the trial, the diary, Clara, the scholarship, the sorry. He didn't leave anything out. "Elena, I'm listening," with the eyes good open and hands still don't interrupted. When he finished, she approached, caressed his face tenderly and said, "Thank you for trusting me with your truth." Nothing more. He didn't ask definitions, neither you offered promises, just presence. It was in that moment when Roberto understood what I had been looking for all that time. Not a second chance with other woman, not a correction of errors, but the possibility of being him same, whole, broken, honest, and still so being loved. It was more than starting over. It was not having to hide while it toward. With the arrival of spring, the terrain began to transform. Roberto and Elena, without any big plans or architects, began to sow. First wildflowers, then aromatic herbs, and later small trees, fruit trees. Each plant had a story. One was dedicated to Ana, another to Clara, another to Roberto's father. Elena also planted one for his younger sister, whom had lost years ago. Neither of them cried while they dug the land. But yes, they were silent, as if each seed was also a prayer. With time, more people of the town began to visit the place. Some, they brought a plant, others a story. The land became a kind of garden, community without official name, but with soul. It was not a sanctuary, neither a memorial. It was a living space where the pain and the beauty could exist at the same time, where the scar was not hidden, but watered with tenderness. One day, a girl of the town let a drawing in the entrance, a little house with flowers, a cross on the center, and two figures holding hands. In the bottom, he wrote with crooked letters, "Place of things that grow back." Roberto found it at dawn, covered with dew, and framed it, hung up in a small wooden structure that was there built with his own hands, at the edge of the garden. From that day, that was the unofficial name of the place, and every time someone I asked about him, Elena said with a smile, "There where things grow again." Roberto no longer needed definitions. There were discovered that some stories do not end with a full stop, but with roots, and that those roots, even twisted or wounded, can hold new branches. Love, he understood, is not a single fruit. It is a tree that, if cared for, blooms more than once. Over time, Elena became part of Roberto's routine. Not in an invasive or dramatic way, she was simply there. The slow Sunday breakfasts, in the shared laughter while painting the bench's garden, in the sunset walks when he darling seemed to remember that the beauty does not need explanation. They never talked about dates or papers. Their relationship was not built on the idea of arriving somewhere, but about the certainty of walking together. Father Miguel, who continued to observe in silence, once told them, he said, "What they have created. Here it's not just love, it's a kind of faith, one of those that are not taught, they are only contagious." And he had reason, because even without announce it, without formally inviting, many couples, families, and even single people began to visit the garden with regularly. They left letters, flowers, stones painted with messages of hope. What there was born of the pain had become, unintentionally, a shared shelter. 1 year later, Roberto found his old engagement ring again. The eye had it stored in a box under some tool, held it between his fingers and felt no sadness. He felt gratitude, not for what was not, but for what was ring you there was taught. He took it with him to the garden, called Elena, and they sat together under the eucalyptus tree. There was no speech, just a look, a smile, and the simple gesture of handing it to her. Elena received with the same serenity with the one that always there was, received his history, the placed in a chain, and he wore it around his neck. "It's not a symbol of what's to come," he said, "but of everything we already are." Roberto nodded, because he understood, finally, that love cannot be measured in beginnings, neither in endings, but in constant presence, in company that remains, even when everything the rest changes. Life, little by little, began to resemble that peace that Roberto had so often believed unattainable. It wasn't perfect. There was days of tiredness, moments of doubt, silences that were not always filled with words, but all that also was part of real love, not the one that appears in stories, but of the one that is cultivated like a garden, with patience, perseverance, and dirty hands. Elena, with his easy laughter and firm tenderness, became he home he didn't know he could build. Together they shared small joys, making bread Saturdays at night tomorrow, read out loud under the tree, welcoming volunteers who wanted to learn how to plant. The garden grew, and with he grew up also their inner world. They didn't need witnesses or social media to validate it. Everything was where it should be. No rush, no fear, without masks. One day, Roberto found a young crying next to one of the benches garden. Don't knew, but approached carefully and sat down next to him. He didn't ask that you was passing by, just offered a thermos with tea. The young man he accepted, and after a few minutes he started talking. He had lost his mother, he had broken up with his couple and felt worthless. Roberto didn't say, "Everything's going to be okay," nor you offered empty phrases. He told him his own history, without embellishments, without heroism. He told her about Anne, about Clara, about her fall and her reconstruction. The young man listened, as if every word was a rope launched in half of the shipwreck. When they said goodbye, he left a stone painted with the word resist. Roberto la placed in the edge of a flower pot, along with so many others that arrived every week, and he thought maybe that was the only thing one could do in this life. Continue sowing where others doubt that anything can grow. If this image of hope resonated with you, send this story to someone who needs it. Remember it. The years did not announce themselves, but they arrived. Gray hairs began to appear in the Roberto's temples, and the first lines in Elena's face became on maps of lived stories. The garden continued standing, more leafy than ever. Some of the first plants already, they bore fruit, and trees planted by the trembling hands of former visitors now offered shade to new generations. Many of those who once came to heal returned to celebrate. Births, reconciliations, sobriety anniversaries. The place was no longer just fertile ground. It was a symbol, a space where the imperfection had permission to flourish. Roberto and Elena, without ever having signed papers, neither pronounced public vows, lived as if every day was a renewed choice. To love each other in the everyday had become his greatest ritual. One autumn afternoon, Father Miguel visited by surprise. He brought with him a black-covered notebook. They sat down in the gallery. While he wine-played with the dry leaves, Miguel Leshay explained that he had decided to write his memoirs, not to publish a book, but to leave proof of the stories that had touched his life. "But there is one that takes up more pages than any other," he said, with a smile that was both nostalgic and grateful. He was referring, of course, to to the story of a love that was not, another that was faked, one that was reborn, asked permission to include their names. "Real. If you want, I'll change the data. But I think the world needs know what you taught me, that even the harsher truth can become seed." Roberto accepted with a grip in his shoulder. Elena just said, "If that helps someone else stay, then it's worth it." Father Miguel's memoirs never reached the bookstores, but they circulated from hand to hand among parishioners, friends and young seminarians. The chapter dedicated to Roberto and Elena became in the most talked about, not because of its drama, but because of its true, without embellishment. "There are stories that don't need miracles," he wrote the priest, "because already it are in his way of resisting." When Miguel died, years later, at a quiet age and surrounded by affection, it was Elena who read a fragment of his writings in the farewell mass, did with the voice slow, as if each word was an offering. When he finished, he placed on the altar a small plant, sprouted from a seed that Miguel himself there was sown. In his garden, "It's you too," he whispered, and at that moment many of those present understood that the death does not extinguish what has been sown with love. Elena it found there at dawn, with the candle still lit and the eyes lost among the golden tones of the sky. He said nothing. He just sat next to her and leaned the head in his shoulder. They remained so for long minutes, as if the time would have passed, stopped, to give them an intimate space between the hours. Then, without words, they began to collect fallen branches and dry leaves, as they did every time they felt that the garden needed a respite. That was his way of caring, with simple gestures, with constant presence. That morning, while accommodated the land around a new jasmine plant, Roberto commented, "Miguel said that true love doesn't make noise, but it leaves an echo." Elena smiled. "And I think that echo is we carry inside, even if sometimes we don't know it, name it." It was so, when they knew, without need for pacts or signatures, that were exactly where they should be. With the passage of the days, the Roberto and Elena's story became in a kind of local legend, tenderly told between generations. Not as a tragedy, but as the example of transformation. Children, they asked for the garden of second times, and the adults found over there a respite from the world. In one corner of the lot, they built a small wooden library, open to the public. Each book bore an inscription: "Take it, read it, return it, or sow it, other in your place." The project grew up, and with the link between the community and that piece of land that had healed so many wounds. No one remembered exactly when it all started, but everyone knew the most important thing, that every flower, every bench, every shadow was there because someone, once, dared to stay after from chaos, to stay and to take care. One afternoon, many years later, a young woman, Nurse Almonds, arrived at the garden for the first time. He was passing through the town, tired of a life that didn't quite fit her. There was ear talk from the place in an online forum, where someone he said that there was a land that listened and did not judge. He walked among the trees, he read the messages painted on the stones, and sat down by the source. "I didn't know good that I was looking, but I felt that something in I started to breathe differently." It was so when found the small metal box hidden under the bench. He opened it with trembling hands and read the letter that Roberto had left years ago. When it was finished, it closed the eyes. She didn't cry. She just stayed still, like someone who, without knowing it, there was arrived home. That night, he left his own message, written on a sheet of paper folded carefully. "I don't know still who I am, but here nobody demands it of me. Thank you for the fertile silence." placed inside the box and sealed it again. Before leaving, he took a small lavender sprout from a nearby pot and saved in her bag. There were no certainties in his mind, but there was an intuition. Someday I would come back, and maybe then I would plant something of my own, because I understood, although I still couldn't explain it, that place was not just land, neither garden. It was a heart collective beating in calm, a sanctuary where the stories were not erased, but rather took root, where the pain was not an enemy, but fertilizer, and where, even after the lies, after the losses of the false names and the broken roads, always there was a truth waiting to grow. Elena and Roberto grew old together as one lives in the fields, with clear seasons, with deep roots, with falling leaves without drama and sprouts that are born without permission. They never made a big ceremony, but every anniversary was celebrated with a new tree planted in some corner of the garden. Your history no longer to them belonged completely. There was become part of something bigger. Sometimes letters arrived addressed to the caretakers of the garden. Others times were just silences shared between strangers who knew that place there was sustained when nothing else did, and that it was enough. There was no spectacular ending, nor any farewells written in stone, only the natural passage of the time, like a candle that goes out after giving enough light. One day, they simply stopped coming, but no one felt like they were gone because they were still there in every corner. Next to the old eucalyptus, today there is a simple, undated wooden plaque that says, "Here there lived two people who decided stay." Nobody touches that phrase, nobody decorates it. It's like a prayer, not religious, but sacred. The garden continues growing, cared for by new hands, visited by new souls, and planted with new stories. And although people change, the spirit remains. Because there was a day, many autumns ago, when a wedding did not take place. And from that empty, a truth was born that flourished without asking permission. A truth that teaches, to those who stop to look, that even from the cruelest lie, from the wound deeper, something real can sprout. Something that cares, that listens, that remains. Something that, with good luck, someday also teach us to stay. Did you make it this far? Prove it, like, comment, or share this post. History with who you think so needs.